Butch woke up in a good mood. He hoped he and his wife Becky could find a way to move on, like his brother and his wife Tessa. They needed to talk. But unlike her sister, Becky did not break off relations with her admirer on the side. The forbidden hobby turned out to be too tempting, and she could not resist. Plus, her lover was an up-and-coming artist, which made her weak in the knees. Butch and Becky met for coffee in the kitchen. Butch cleared his throat and said, "Good morning. You look great. A slight mess after sleep suits you." "Thanks, I guess," Becky replied. "I'm serious," Butch insisted. "My heart beats a little faster when I look at you." There was no answer. After a short silence, Butch continued. "Jay and Tess went to the lake. They seem to be getting along better. We could do something similar." "That would be nice," Becky said. "It's just a very busy time in the gallery right now, a completely inopportune moment. But we will have time for dinner and dancing." "We haven't done this for a long time," Butch retorted. "I wish I could," Becky said. "On Friday?" "Agreed." Becky made a note to call Rob later. Robin Slaughter was working on his new project when his phone alerted him to a new message. It was short, "Let's go dancing on Friday." He replied, "Great." Becky replied, "More details later." Rob's new work was a ceramic figurine of a forest fairy. She was about 60 centimeters tall and sat on a small mound. Her feet and knees were together, exposing her graceful ankles, slender calves, and tapered hips. She was wearing roll-up shorts and a tank top. Her hair was styled in the style of Marilyn Monroe. The fairy's elbows rested on her knees, and in her hands she held a nest with 2 chicks, pulling their beaks towards her face. She leaned in with pursed lips, as if she was trying to feed them or kiss them. Overall, the work expressed strong femininity and harmony with nature. A real masterpiece. He called Becky and said, "Come to the studio, I want to show you something." Becky arrived shortly after the call. Having examined the figure, she said, "She's so sexy." Her eyes were slightly cloudy. "So are you," Rob whispered. "I would love to draw your portrait." Soon Rob stood with a palette and brush in his hands, and Becky emerged from behind the screen in a light sky blue silk robe that reached to her knees, contrasting with her brown hair. She sat down on a low chair. Her cheeks were pink, her eyes were shining with excitement, her mouth was open, her face expressed pure lust. As she raised her hands to tuck her hair behind her ears, the robe fell open, revealing her nakedness. Her blush spread to her chest. She slowly spread her knees, and her body was like a magnet pulling towards her. Rob was so excited that there was no further talk about any art. The brush and palette fell to the floor, and they rushed to each other. Moans, screams, and heavy breathing filled the air as their bodies moved in a passionate rush. Becky's hands sometimes flew up, sometimes clung to Rob's back, and her legs stood firmly on the floor while her hips eagerly met his movements. When her strength and passion dried up, Becky realized that her marriage to Butch was over. It's Friday. Butch was looking forward to a date to reconnect with Becky. She still had power over him like a flute over a cobra. The only question that remained was, who was who? Becky prepared thoroughly. She chose a tight black dress with a mid-thigh slit that showed off her curves, an open back, and a plunging neckline, so she decided to go braless. Black stilettos were on her graceful feet. The red polish on her fingernails and toenails matched perfectly. The makeup was flawless. Every hair is in place. She was a true embodiment of heavenly beauty. Butch's heart rate quickened as he admired her beauty. "Holy guacamole, you could make Daddy change his outfit," Butch exclaimed. "The saints protect us." Becky smiled and said, "I'm ready. Shall we go?" They had a great time over dinner in a cozy atmosphere. Wine, candles, soft music, but no real communication. Every time Butch tried to start a serious conversation, Becky turned him to more mundane topics. Butch became increasingly irritated and anxious. They finished their meal and headed to a popular local establishment. It was crowded inside, the music was blaring, creating a mesmerizing atmosphere. Butch immediately took Becky by the hand and led her to the dance floor. An incendiary melody was playing. Becky twirled and moved smoothly to the beat of the bass, attracting considerable attention. After a few songs, Butch suggested, "Would you like a drink?" He walked up to the bar and ordered 2 vodka and sodas. While they were waiting for drinks, a man approached him and said, "I like the way your wife dances. Do you mind if I ask her to dance?" Butch looked at Becky. She answered him with a neutral look. "If she agrees, then so do I," Butch said. The couple returned to the dance floor and disappeared into the crowd. 10 minutes passed from the moment the drinks were served, but they still weren't there. 10 minutes later, Butch went to look for her. He looked around at the dancing crowd, the occupied tables and booths. Finally, he headed towards the toilets at the back of the club. As he approached, he noticed how one woman entered the ladies' room and almost immediately came back out with an indignant expression on her face. Butch felt a dull feeling of anxiety arise in his chest. He looked into the men's room, but found no one there. Then he carefully opened the door to the women's room, stood in the doorway, and was greeted by the indignant looks of several women. "What do you want here, pervert?" One of them was indignant. "I'm looking for my wife," Butch answered calmly. The women looked at each other and nodded towards one of the booths, silently pointing it out to him. Butch slowly walked up to the cabin and, looking over the top edge of the door, saw a scene that made his insides clench. Becky was kneeling in front of a man, completely engrossed in the process, completely unaware of his presence. Butch shook his head and took out his phone, recording several minutes of what was happening. The man, noticing him, looked up and blinked rapidly, a smirk on his lips. Becky, carried away, didn't even pay attention. "Stop writing this down," said one of the women. "This is illegal." "Shut up," Butch replied. "This is my wife, and I am writing this down for our future grandchildren." With these words, he turned to leave. The man Becky was with followed him and put his hand on his shoulder. Butch immediately turned around and threw a straight punch with all his strength, catching the man right between the eyes. He collapsed as if knocked down. The women screamed and ran out of the toilet. Butch left the club. Already on the street, he called his brother Jason. The call went to voicemail. "I need your help, brother," he said into the phone. "Tomorrow." Having finished the conversation, he headed home. The next morning, Butch's phone beeped with a new message. It was from Jason. "What's happened?" "Becky is cheating." The phone rang. "Holy God," Jay said. "You are sure?" "I saw it with my own eyes," Butch answered in a cold tone. "Damn it. Do you want to come to us?" "Yes," Butch answered. "We'll be here." "When you're ready, come," Jay said. Butch took his jacket and keys and was about to leave the house when he saw Becky on the threshold. She looked like she had been shot out of a cannon. The dress was wrinkled and stained, her lipstick was smudged, and several strands of her brown hair had fallen out of place, resembling fluffy cotton candy. One foot was missing a shoe, and on the other hand, she held the remaining one. She smelled like after a marathon of passion. "Good morning, Felicia," he said. "You look wonderful, just right for your morning neighbors. How was your night at Pleasure Hill?" Becky looked at him uncertainly through her reddened eyes. "Do we need to talk?" "What do you want to talk about?" Butch asked. "It's not what you think," Becky said. "What do you think it was like?" Butch asked calmly. "I think you looked like you were enjoying yourself. And it wasn't me," he shouted, sputtering. Becky recoiled. He had never spoken to her like that before. "I don't know what came over me," she said. "Try to think about it carefully," he replied sharply. "At this point, I think it's all over between us. I left the worms in the refrigerator for your breakfast. Eat them and die." With these words, Butch walked past her and left. Butch was sitting at the kitchen table with his brother and Tessa. The atmosphere was like a wake. All three sat in complete silence, looking at one point, amazed and stunned. "You are sure?" Tessa asked. "I saw it with my own eyes," Butch answered, although I couldn't believe it myself. "I don't know this woman. I don't need such a wife." Tessa sighed quietly and shook her head, then said, "I have to talk to her. Something's wrong here." With these words, she stood up and headed towards the exit. After she left, Jason turned to Butch. Do you know this guy? Never saw him before last night, Butch answered. Becky said that she was helping someone prepare for an exhibition, but she didn't name names. I think we should find out who he is, Jason said. Sooner or later, you will have to talk. I know, Butch agreed, but not today. I have too much anger right now. I want to knock all this dirt out of her. Jason sighed heavily and covered his brother's hand with his own. Brother, I understand. No one would be able to digest it so easily. They sat in silence, lost in their thoughts, when they heard the sound of footsteps. It was Tessa returning from a conversation with Becky. The expression on her face was serious and concentrated, as if she was thinking about something important. Well? Butch asked, looking up at her. Tessa sat down opposite him and was silent for a while, collecting her thoughts. I talked to Becky, she finally said. She looks depressed, but I'm not sure she realizes the full extent of her actions. She seemed to be in some kind of fog, as if she had lost herself and the meaning of what was happening. Fog? Butch asked with bitterness in his voice. She seems to have a pretty clear mind when it comes to Rob. I don't justify her, Tessa answered firmly, but I think she needs to understand what she is destroying and what she can lose. I invited her to stay with us for a while. She needs time to come to her senses. Butch frowned as he considered her words. He wasn't sure he wanted Becky around, not even Tessa and Jason. But he trusted his brother and Tessa, and if anyone could help him see the situation from the outside, it was them. If you think it will help, Butch said finally, so be it. Although, to be honest, it seems like a waste of time to me. Tessa nodded, understanding his doubts. I know it hurts. But maybe she needs to realize who she's going to lose. Sometimes people only realize the value of things when they are on the verge of losing them. Rob was lying in bed. His head was pounding, but he still grinned. He had a lot of fun with that babe last night, he thought. He did not leave a single place unconquered. He didn't have any special feelings for her, but she was very useful in advancing his career. He was going uphill, and besides, she was a great find. There were only 3 weeks left before his exhibition. You can be patient. Tessa was driving to meet her sister. Her thoughts were seething. Becky became bolder every day. First flirting, then kissing, dancing, groping, and blowjob, all at a fast pace. What Butch described that happened last night was downright reckless. She was losing control. Tessa knocked on the door of Butch and Becky's house. The door was unlocked, and it was quiet inside. A quick inspection revealed that Becky was sleeping naked in the master bedroom. She managed to take a shower, but it was bad. She still smelled of alcohol and something unpleasant. Tessa shook her sister, not too gently. Becky opened her eyes and looked around in confusion for a moment. She pulled the sheet up to cover her nakedness. "Where am I?" she asked. "You're home in your bed," Tessa said, looking into her sister's eyes. An empty gaze stared back at her. "Do you remember what happened last night?" "Vaguely," Becky replied. "I'm in pain. It felt like there was a party in my mouth, and everyone was there." "Damn it, sister. Butch said you were pleasuring yourself in a public restroom somewhere," Tessa said. "What's wrong with you?" "I know," Becky said. "I was there, like an outside observer. Every nerve cell in my body was on edge and everything was on fire. I will never forget this." Her gaze was empty, frozen. "Butch is just destroyed," Tessa said. "What did he do to deserve this? What about Sarah?" Suddenly, Becky's face changed. She looked at her sister with a pleading look, but remained silent. "You need another shower," Tessa said. "Try using soap." Butch had a sad look on his face. "I have a hole in my soul," he said. "The heart pumps cold water." "Do you want to look at Tinny?" Jay asked. "A cold beer won't hurt, isn't it?" Tiny was far from small. 6'6", 275 pounds, and he owned a bar named after him. "2 glasses," Jay said. "Best Heine, please Teeny." Tiny returned with 2 frozen mugs that looked like teacups in his hands. "You look miserable," he said, looking at Butch. "It's like your dog got run over." That's spot on, Butch said. I don't want to talk about it. As you say. A pair of thin hands appeared on the bar next to him and placed 4 empty mugs. Butch looked at their owner, and time seemed to stand still. He raised his eyebrows without realizing it and stared. 4 more, please, Teeny, she said. Both Tiny and Jay noticed the scene. Meet my new waitress, Petra Lange, Tiny said. She's on a work visa from Germany. She was absolutely gorgeous, blue-eyed and curvy. Her shiny blonde hair was braided into a long French braid. A real live Polish girl. She smelled like coconut oil. Nice to meet you, Butch stammered, clearing his throat. Smooth, Jay muttered. Petra smiled mysteriously. She took the mugs and headed to the table. As she placed them on the table, one of the visitors gently touched her buttock. Without the slightest hesitation or expression of emotion, she slapped the offender in the face, and he ended up on the floor, which caused the amusement of his friends. Damn it, Jay said. She's truly something. Butch needed clean underwear. He was staying with his brother, and it was time to do his laundry. He knew that Becky was at work, which meant it was a good time to run home without unnecessary trouble. He had almost filled his backpack with socks, t-shirts, and underwear when he heard a car pull up. There was nowhere to escape, so he went to the door. Of course, it turned out to be Becky, and Rob was with her. Becky noticed him. Butch, what are you doing here? I'm leaving, Butch replied. Don't leave because of me, Rob said with a grin. One more word, blink, and I'll show you your soul, Butch said calmly. Rob grabbed his fly and moved his groin slightly, but said nothing. I can show you the other side if you want, Butch said. Please don't, Becky said. Butch, I really need to talk to you, she added. Soon, Butch replied, not taking his eyes off Rob. Very soon. Butch got on his fat boy motorcycle and rode off. What a jerk he is, Rob said. What did you see in him? Becky remained silent. Butch entered Jay's house. Tessa looked at his face and asked, What happened? I went home to pick up some clothes and Becky showed up. With my lover. Oh shit, Tessa said. And what did you do? I left before I killed them both, Butch said. I'm literally sick, he added. There's something seriously wrong with her, Tessa said. Please don't hurt her. I won't, Butch said. I have a knot in my stomach. I think I'll go have a beer. Jay will be home soon, she said, or I'll just tell him where you went. There is no time like the present, he said and walked towards Tiny. Tessa called her sister. Damn it, Becca, what's wrong with you? I know, I didn't think he'd be home. Butch deserves so much better. I'm ashamed of you, Tessa said. Butch was sitting on his second glass of beer when Jay came in and sat down next to him. What's the news, buddy? Jay asked. Big bubbles, no problem, Butch replied. I need a plan. Tessa told me everything, Jay said. What are you planning? We need to show these two our respect. I promised Tess I wouldn't hurt Becca, Butch said, but Sweetie is a different story. We should think about it, Jay said. Unknown to the brothers, the old cowboy sitting at the bar had been eavesdropping on them for some time. He was wearing a threadbare Stetson hat, drenched in sweat, and his denim shirt with mother-of-pearl buttons was unbuttoned to his navel. He was wearing faded jeans and scuffed Tony Llama boots. He ate a purple pickled egg and washed it down with beer. Why do you guys need a badger? He muttered under his breath. We're digging the basement, Butch replied. We heard that they work well. Are you spying on us, old man? My name is Alan Tozier, he whispered, a little louder than before, with a distinct hiss on the SH. Butch and Jay Thompson, the brothers, introduced themselves. It seems that there is a badger on my property. Digs everywhere. I'm afraid my horses might break their legs, said Alan. We could help you with this. We will be glad, honestly. Where is your site? Butch asked. I have 80 acres along Mill Road. Don't miss it. There's an old international harvester sitting on blocks in the yard, Alan said. It's downright luxurious, Butch said. Give us your contact number and we will contact you. But they weren't the only ones listening. Petra also listened to their conversation. "I would like to go with you," she said. "I've never seen a badger." "I need to get the trap first," Butch replied. "I'm on a bike." "My car is at home. Give me a lift and I'll drive," Petra said. "There's a trap in our hut," Jay noted. "See you later, I'll take it." A couple of hours later, Petra and Butch arrived at the hut. "It's a beautiful place," Petra said, looking around. "Secluded. Are they burying bodies here?" she asked with a smile. Suddenly, she stopped, noticing a skunk running past. "Is this a badger?" she asked. "This is our security," Butch explained. "Try not to distract him. He's in business." "Is he yours?" she asked. "Not really. We let him be here, and he helps us sometimes," Butch said. "He's a veteran." "Is he dangerous?" "Usually no, but pay attention to his tail. If the tail stands straight up, it means he is on alert. If he turns away, he's nervous. If he stomps his paws, he is either angry or scared. He is usually a sweet creature, loves Skittles candy." "Good to know," Petra said. "Would you like a beer?" Butch suggested. "I would prefer tea," she replied. "I can prepare my own special mixture." "Okay," he replied. Petra returned a few minutes later. "It's brewing. It takes time. Would you like to smoke a pipe while we wait?" she asked. "Okay. What's the reason?" "You look a little tense," Petra said. They sat on the veranda, smoking a pipe, and soon fell into silence. After a while, Butch spoke again. "If it's not a secret, what brought you to America?" "One day I came home early and found my boyfriend in bed with my best friend. I wanted to leave both of them far behind," she said. "I understand," Butch nodded. "The tea is probably ready," Petra said. She returned with 2 steaming mugs and handed one to Butch, who immediately took a sip and nearly spat out the drink. "Crap," exclaimed Butch. "It tastes like something terrible." "Taste is not the main thing," Petra smiled. "What then?" he asked. "A few hints," she replied. "What's in it?" Butch asked. "Mescaline. Peyote," she replied. "Isn't it dangerous?" Butch asked. "Not physically," Petra replied. "Maybe your pulse and temperature will rise a little. Don't worry, I've tried this before." "I'm close," she said. She took his hand. "There is no reason to be afraid," she said quietly. "Drink until the end." They sat in silence. After 45 minutes, Butch felt warmth in his chest and a slight ringing at the edge of his consciousness. "Nice," he thought, and then he suddenly vomited. "Unexpected," he muttered. "It's part of the process," Petra explained. After another 15 minutes, he was lost in an endless series of thoughts that replaced each other in his head, like a parade of images before his mind's eye. "Why are we here? What is this all for?" he asked. "It's not for me to answer these questions," Petra replied. "Stay attentive, and perhaps the answers will come to you. Do you want to see Jesus? Or Elvis? Did you know they look alike?" They looked at each other and laughed. Butch felt something pressing on his heart, and something responded in him. He described his feelings to Petra. "She wants to connect with you. Extend your hand towards her," Petra said. "Let her. She won't hurt you." After a while, Petra said, "Such a beautiful night. Do you want to go for a walk?" Getting up from the veranda, Butch warned the skunk. "Keep your eyes open, buddy. There's something wrong here." "Come on, Sherlock," Petra said, holding out her hand to him. As they approached the edge of the forest, Butch suddenly realized that he had never seen such greenery before. She seemed to vibrate. A young deer in the distance jumped sharply, disappearing into the thicket. His front legs straightened out like springs, while his hind legs remained in place. "Wow," thought Butch. As they entered the forest, the birds sitting on the branches seemed to accompany them, flying from tree to tree, chirping and approving of their path. Everywhere Butch looked, he saw angels in the landscape around him. While walking, it seemed to him that he could hear the sap flowing under the bark of the trees, and the leaves, rustling overhead, seemed to be breathing. Suddenly, there was a loud hooting sound very close by, and Butch looked up to see a great horned owl staring at them with its unblinking eyes. He knows, thought Butch. Looking around, he noticed that they were surrounded by deepening darkness. We have to go back, he said. They had to hurry. He didn't want to spend the night in the forest at all. Butch was looking for a way out and suddenly noticed a flickering silhouette holding a lantern in front of him, smoothly gliding through the trees ahead. Let's go get him, Butch said. When they reached the clearing, Butch looked up at the sky and saw the stars' countless fires stretching into infinity. Everything became clear. Stardust. We were created from stardust. Always have been. We will always be connected before and after time ceases to exist. Entering the hut, Petra covered her eyes with her hand. Turn out the lights, she said. Butch lit a couple of candles, and they sat on the sofa. He looked into Petra's eyes. Her irises disappeared, replaced by dilated pupils. Her smile excited him. There was a certain hungry passion in her. She took off her top and bra. Chest for battle, thought Butch, extending his hand to her. Don't touch, she whispered. It will come later. Look into my eyes and try to synchronize your breathing with mine, she said. She began to breathe slowly, deeply. It was the only sound in the hut. Butch knew her breasts were magnificent, but he didn't dare break eye contact to look at her. The feeling was amazing. He felt his excitement reaching its limit. He didn't want to lose this state. This was the first time for him. How do you feel? Petra asked. Like I could punch through concrete, he replied. Her smile became dreamy. Touch me, she whispered. Please. The hairs on her legs seemed soft, flowing around her figure. They looked smooth, without signs of shaving or creams. It was so unusual and alluring. His body was filled with intense desire, his arousal growing stronger every second, pulsating, burning, ready to sink and disappear into her. The sensation was so strong that he began to shiver, but not from the cold. He tried his best not to lose consciousness. The last thing he remembered was Petra whispering, Lord in heaven. Butch and Petra woke up entwined with each other. How do you feel? Petra asked with a smile. Devastated, updated, ready to fight, Butch replied. I feel like an untwisted spring. It was the most memorable day of my life. Day? Yes, the whole thing. It felt like I touched your center. Honestly, I felt your consciousness. It helps a lot to have an experienced guide guiding you, Petra said. I'm glad you were able to accept it. You haven't missed the point. May your soul shine for a long time to come. She smiled. Compared to an illegal drug, the difference was striking. The drug could make you feel like a new person, but the problem was that the new person also wanted another dose. With peyote, a small amount could last a long time. It was possible to do without the next dose. Why haven't I encountered this before? Butch asked. It's a Schedule I-controlled substance and has been heavily regulated since the hippie days of the 60s. The indigenous tribes of the Southwest and northern Mexico have been using this for a very long time, perhaps since the first time anyone dared to take a bite of a cactus. These days, even Silicon Valley is microdosing it to stay on top of its game. The laboratories only recently received permission to conduct research. It has already shown promise for treating PTSD and major depression at the end of life, but much more data needs to be collected before peyote is considered useful for medical purposes. Finally, Jay found Butch at their house. Pick up the phone, Homer. It's been 3 days since no one has heard from you. Damn it. I needed time to collect my thoughts. I was distracted, Butch replied. Petra entered. Yes, it's noticeable, Jay replied, grinning faintly. Your daughter lives with Tessa and me. She misses you. I thought her mother had it, Butch said. According to Sarah, Becky has guests on a regular basis, Jay said. Without another word, Butch stood up, gathered his things and the skunk trap, and walked out. Butch and Petra broke up at her house and went their separate ways. When his motorcycle drove into her entrance, Sarah stood on the threshold. She looked upset and angry. When he came to hug her, she slapped him in the face and burst into tears. He held her tightly to him. As her sobs began to subside, she whispered quietly, "I thought you had abandoned me. I was so scared. It hurts me that I made you think that way. Next time you can leave me first, and we'll be even. If this ever happens again, you can punish me. I hope you don't know what that means yet." She continued to hold on to him without looking him in the eyes and asked quietly, "Do you still love me, Daddy?" These words tore his heart. He replied, barely holding back tears, "Until the day I die, dear, and beyond. Never doubt it. The proudest day of my life was when you were born. You appeared, squeaked thinly, and immediately fell asleep. What a loss." She laughed and finally let him go. "Well, where would you like to live?" Butch asked. "With you, Uncle Jay, and Aunt Tessa, if possible. It's simply impossible with Mom." Butch really needed a plan. "We need to check the layout of the showroom, starting with security," Jay said. "Entrances and exits, as well as police shift times." "Sounds reasonable. I have a couple of ideas. I still think the Badger will come in handy," Butch said. "We should think about this. I don't want anyone to get hurt. These kids might be meaner than they look." "You can slip it into the car of the right person, unexpectedly." "What a surprise," Butch answered. "Besides, we promised Alan to catch this Tasmanian devil." "We'll put it aside for now," Jay replied. "Would you like to look at the gallery?" "Go ahead," Butch replied. The brothers walked slowly through the gallery, pretending to look at the works of art, but in fact they were inspecting the security cameras and guards. "They're not armed, which is a big plus," Jay noted. Butch studied the layout carefully. This space could make a nice racetrack. "Here are the double side doors in case of an emergency." "It's worth thinking about," Jay said. In the planning room, which also served as Jay's garage, the brothers discussed timing and strategy. "When do you want to start?" Jay asked. "Depends on when our Badger joins the team," Butch replied. "The exhibition starts next week and ends next weekend. We don't have much time. Are you ready to go to work without him?" Jay asked. "I don't think we have a choice. The opportunity is too good to pass up," Butch said. "Go to Tozierville immediately," Jay said with a smile. Butch pulled up next to an old truck. He got out of his car and walked towards a man who was loading construction materials into an ATV. "Hey, buddy," Butch said. "Just in time," Alan muttered. "Would you like some gloves?" "Maybe later. I'm here for the Badger," Butch said. "I have a trap in my car." "Thought you might like some good company," the old cowboy said with a grin, barely peeking through his mustache. "Thanks for the offer, honestly, but this is an urgent matter," Butch replied. "Well, you better hurry," Alan said. "Can you tell me a good place to start?" Butch asked. "I saw footprints near a spring in the southwest of my site. Go there and good luck," said the old herder. Butch put on his backpack and went for a walk with a trap on his shoulder. He found a spring about 1.5 kilometers from the house and began installing equipment. The place looked relatively untouched, but he decided to leave his trap anyway. Butch loaded the trap with cobs of sweet corn, a can of worms, and smoked herring for scent. And, of course, some colorful sweets for good luck. Leaving the trap at the source, he returned to Tozier's house. "You should check on her at least once a day. Good binoculars will save you a trip if you don't need to change bait." "Did you mask your scent?" asked Tozier. Butch felt like a schoolboy who had failed an assignment. "Don't expect instant results," Alan chuckled. "See you tomorrow." Jay and Butch were sitting in the garage drinking beer. Butch was thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" Jay asked. Butch was silent for a moment and then said, "I think we need more support, more chaos and confusion." "I like chaos," Jay replied. "It leads to trembling witnesses." "Do you remember those two crazy Randall brothers?" Butch asked. Jay smiled, remembering the old times. "I remember how they competed to see who could jump the farthest on the gold wing, or who will leave more sparks on the corners, sliding along the exhaust pipes." "Money can't buy talent like that," Butch said. "But we can rent them," Jay replied, and they both laughed. "Do you think they're still alive?" Jay asked. "I wouldn't dare guess," Butch said. Madness usually doesn't last long. We could use them. Let's Google them, Jay suggested. Butch and Jay met two new characters. Sitting at Tiny's bar table were Bob and Keith Randall, two backup motorcycle racers from the old days. Keith looked like an aged George Harrison, the same one from the Beatles, and his older brother Bob was wide-eyed, always surprised. They were lost in memories. Remember when Bob flew off his motorcycle and got a bunch of bruises? Asked Keith. Bob, looking surprised, replied, I remember how the asphalt rips your clothes off when you fall at 40 miles an hour. Then my whole overalls were ripped off. Keith added, the insurer then refused to write off the bike because the engine was still starting. So Bob took it into the ditch, locked the throttle, and started it at full power. He worked on the red line for a full 45 minutes. We were afraid to approach. The engine never seized, although the carburetors got hot and fell off the head. Bob added, say what you want, but these Japanese motorcycles are almost indestructible. Everyone nodded in agreement. We were surprised when you contacted us. Thought you were retired, Keith said. Jay, yes, and I still have Fat Boy, Butch replied. Oink, Bob interjected. Butch rolled his eyes. I modified it a little, suitable for my needs. And what are these needs? Asked Bob. A little bit of track racing. Short and sweet, Butch said. 3 minutes, there and back. Sounds boring, Keith said. In the art gallery, right during the exhibition, Butch added. Keith looked at Bob. Bob, of course, looked, surprised. Adventure, Keith said. What is the motive? 3 minutes of shopping from the highway. Best works. We'll grab what we like, and the rest will go to waste, Butch explained. Someone really screwed you up, Bob said. This artist is sleeping with my wife, Jay added. Butch simply shrugged. Bob and Keith nodded in agreement. When are you planning this? Asked Keith. We are waiting for one more participant, Butch said. No later than next weekend. The Randall brothers exchanged long glances without saying a word. I know where you can get a couple of sporties, Bob said. Seize the moment. They leaned forward and began discussing details. In the planning room, Jay and Butch discussed the final preparations. Ready? Jay asked. There are still some little things left, some equipment, and, of course, the Badger, Butch replied. Have you studied our friend's car well? Jay asked. Not yet. I keep putting it off, Butch admitted with some embarrassment. They sat in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts. Butch cleared his throat and, as if inadvertently, asked, How are you and Tessa? He tensed, as if preparing for a blow. On the surface, everything seems normal, Jay replied. She tries not to touch on the topic, avoids conversations. Feeling like you are walking on thin ice? I hope it goes away. It's a little scary. Do you think she could try again? Butch asked. It's her choice. If she wants to stay with me, she better not try. I made it clear to her that there would be no more questions or explanations. If she does it again, then that's her will. Don't you feel like keeping an eye on her? Butch asked. I don't want to turn my life into a nightmare. She is an adult and is responsible for her own actions. If I have to keep an eye on her, it's easier to let her go now. I don't want to live in constant suspicion. I will be angry with her, and she will hate me for it. I told her that I still love her and will love her, but if this happens again, it's the end. You're a trusting man, brother, Butch said. We can't do anything without trust, you know, Jay answered. What about Becky? She's not the same Becky I knew. She lives only by lust, and she is on the verge of it. She became like an organ grinder for everyone who paid attention to her. Could you tolerate this? I'd like to think not, but love can make a fool of a man. This isn't about love, brother, Butch said. It's compulsion. This is pathological. I knew a girl in college who burned her private part with a curling iron. This is what an itchy trigger is. I think Becky has something similar, only in a milder form. Next stop is Lobotomy City, Jay noted. At that moment, Sarah entered. She looked at her father thoughtfully. Dad, I need my graphing calculator. I left it at home. Will you take me to get him? Butch winced, but said, Of course. Let's go. As they pulled up to the house, Butch said, Wait a minute, okay? He entered the house. Moving carefully down the corridor, he heard a low, drawn-out moan coming from the bedroom. Carefully looking through the slightly open door, he saw Becky with two men. Stunned by what he saw, Butch froze for a moment, and then, angry to the limit, exclaimed, Damn it! Everyone in the room froze, as if time had stopped. You two, get out of here, and quickly, he growled. The two men quickly began to get dressed, and, without saying a word, disappeared into the corridor. Becky remained lying on the bed, completely naked, not even trying to cover herself. Her face expressed a mixture of indifference and challenge. What are you doing here, Butch? She said calmly, as if everything that was happening was in the order of things for her. Come to pick up a few things for Sarah. You could at least close the door, he said, holding back his rage. Instead, she almost set us both up. She might have thought that she would come in here, not me. With a casualness that made him shudder, Becky rose from the bed, stretched, and walked toward her clothes, which had been discarded on the floor. Passing by him, she looked at him with an indifferent glance. I didn't think you'd ever know, she whispered, bending down to pull up her skirt. Butch held back the storm of emotions boiling inside, and barely had time to turn away when he heard a quiet, dull sound from her, like a wet exhalation. He recognized the sound as an attempt to hide an awkward moment, but to him it was like the last drops in an already overflowing glass. Test yourself, he said dryly, looking her straight in the eyes with cold fury. You look like a dog licked the last of the mayonnaise. Once he was done, Butch walked out into the hall and beckoned to Sarah, who was waiting outside. She entered, avoiding looking at her mother, quickly collected the necessary things, and left the house silently. As they drove back to Jay and Tessa's house, silence hung over the car like fog. Finally, Sarah, unable to bear it anymore, asked, Dad, what's wrong with Mom? Why is she like this? Butch sighed heavily. He didn't know how to explain everything without causing more pain. I don't know myself, honey. She seems to be going through something strange, something that is difficult to explain, he said, trying to appear calm. Sarah suddenly sobbed, and he felt his heart clench. Touching her on the shoulder, Butch muttered, as if he was calming himself, trying to give confidence to his words. Everything will be fine, honey. I promise everything will be fine. Alan Tauscher was sitting at Teeny's bar, drinking coffee, when Butch came in and sat down next to him. It was Wednesday. Rob's exhibition opened 3 days ago, but the badger still hasn't appeared. Butch felt the pressure, and it showed on his face. Tiny noticed his gloomy mood and decided to cheer him up with a joke. Do you know what the leper said to the girl of easy virtue? Leave a tip, he chuckled. Alan said, I have to go. I have a lot to do. He cleared his throat and hurriedly left. About an hour later, Butch's phone rang. It was Tauscher. Come out, he said. Something is trapped. Butch put the money on the bar and stood up and said, It was Alan. He thinks we've caught a badger. Petra followed him. When they arrived at the outbuildings, they were greeted by a shocking sight. Hanging on the hook of the lift was a young horse, which Alan had half-skinned. Petra looked at this with her eyes widened in amazement, and Butch only squeezed out, Oh my God. Alan said, When I arrived, the south fence was broken. This poor guy got caught in the wire. It would be a shame to throw it away. The meat of a 2-year-old horse is a real delicacy. Butch and Petra watched in silence. Finally, Alan broke the silence. You should check the trap. Take my ATV. Butch and Petra went towards the trap. As they pulled up, Butch noticed something was wrong. It was not a badger too dark and massive. Butch thought, upgrade. The creature watched them calmly, without blinking. Butch put on his welding gloves and lifted the cage into the back of the SUV. Heavy, about 16 kilograms of pure muscle. Butch left the trap uncovered and drove to the barn. As he approached the old cowboy, Alan glanced at the contents of the cage and stopped his work. "What are you planning to do with it?" he asked. "Mr. Deeds is going to town," Butch replied. "What is this?" Petra asked. "It's a tailed tiger, girl. He works with a chainsaw and will remove the skin in 1 or 2 minutes. And if things continue like this, he might break something else tonight," Alan Tauscher said. "This is a wolverine. Young, but there's no doubt about it, Petra," Butch said. "It's going to be fun at the Carlisle Museum tonight. Bring someone with you." On the way to the city, Butch called his brother. "I'm on my way. Time to call the Randalls." The team has assembled. Jay looked at Butch's prey and said, "No, it's not a badger. We can't release him into a crowd of people. There will be a bloodbath." "We can put him in his car," Butch suggested. It was already dark. The brothers quietly walked around the museum parking lot and found Rob's Audi. Butch used a special unlocking tool and opened the passenger side door. As soon as Mr. Deeds showed his head, Jay quickly grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. Deeds began to twitch, growl, and chatter his teeth. "Hey, calm down, Deeds. We're making things easier for you here," Jay said, and tossed him inside. "Now behave badly." Black. Everything around was black. Black helmets and leather. Black motorcycles. Black thoughts. The only exception were balaclavas with a grinning skull painted on them. The gang was assembled and ready for action. Jay went first. He was wearing a loose black sweatshirt with a large hood. As he climbed the steps, a child looked under the hood and clung closer to his mother. Jay reached the doors and locked them. Moving forward, he pulled out a paintball gun strapped to his back and began shooting at the security cameras above. Immediately, the guard moved to stop him, and Jay pulled out a large canister of Bear Bee Gone spray hidden in his sleeve and sprayed it in the guard's direction. It stopped him in his tracks. The hood slipped down, revealing a Wes Borland-style paint job on Limp Bizkit's face, a white key pattern in the center surrounded by a field of black and black lenses hiding his eyes, turning him into a demon. Jay then threw a flashbang towards the entrance and continued shooting paint at various oil paintings and occasionally at art lovers. Hearing the noise, the three bikers set off, crossed the street, and rode onto the curb. As they approached the steps, they stood on the running boards, leaned forward, and added gas, driving into the building with a roar as if fleeing hell. They went inside one by one, and with the roar of the engine, the motorcycles rolled down the corridors like a scene from a movie, leaving rubber tracks and chaos in their wake. Butch noticed the pedestal on which the exhibit stood and, slowing down, threw it into his massive backpack. He repeated this a few more times, carefully arranging the trophies like Santa Claus on the reverse side of the law. As the rear wheel of his motorcycle began to slip, releasing acrid smoke, the air filled with noise and screams were heard from the crowd. Butch thought, screaming women and burning rubber, it's like something out of a Tarantino movie. Meanwhile, the Randall brothers closed a circle around the hall, zipping around the hall at high speed, as if in some kind of racing oval. Bob became almost ecstatic, shouting, "Santa's not accepting returns anymore. The cash register is closed." Each time he turned, he put his foot forward like a racer. Keith, more focused, was busy carefully picking up other items and placing them in his backpack. Another flashbang explosion, and visitors began running out, dropping their bags and hats. The brothers headed towards the side exit, disappearing into the night like shadows. Butch turned toward the main exit, leaned forward sharply to compress the front shock absorbers, and threw the bike up, landing on the rear wheel. At high speed, he rolled down the steps, jumping from one to the other, and stopped where Jay was waiting for him. Jay quickly jumped on his motorcycle, and they headed towards the back street where the getaway truck was waiting for them. Butch quickly drove up the aluminum ramp inside, and Jay immediately raised the ramp and slammed the door. The sirens were not heard, and Tiny, sitting behind the wheel of the truck, calmly pulled away, heading towards his bar. "Blood and feathers," Jay said. "Hell yeah, everywhere," Butch chuckled. The entire operation took less than 4 minutes. Rob Slaughter stood in complete dismay as he surveyed the destruction. His life's work, some paintings were destroyed, others were desecrated with paint, and some disappeared without a trace. He lowered his head, feeling desperate, and waited for the police. Becky approached him, trying to hug him. "Honey, we can fix this," she said. "There's nothing to fix here," he shouted in despair. After a pause, he continued with fury, "It's all because of you. If I see your face again, it will be too soon," he growled. Becky remained rooted to the spot. When the police collected all the evidence and filed a report, Rob headed to his car, still in shock. He got behind the wheel and only then noticed a strange smell. He examined the interior and noticed that the leather upholstery was torn to shreds. Mr. Deeds's head emerged from the trunk, looking like a miniature Channing Tatum in a fur coat. He looked clearly unhappy. Rob reached for the door handle, but Mr. Deeds instantly climbed out of the trunk and grabbed him by the neck. Screams, growls, and sounds of slamming teeth were heard from the car, while the Wolverine literally combed the unfortunate artist. Most of the team gathered at Tiny's bar, who, as always, was watching what was happening. No one mentioned the night's adventures, but fun was in the air. It was clear to everyone that very few people would be able to get enough sleep that night. A familiar melody came from the jukebox. I saw the bright lights of Memphis and the Commodore Hotel, and under a street lamp I met a Southern beauty. To everyone's surprise, Bob and Keith Randall walked into the bar. Bob looked surprised. Not surprisingly, he also looked pleased. Butch grinned and said, "Look what the cat brought." Keith said, "Speak up. Bob and I were just sitting in his El Camino, checking out a .357 revolver and finding it had too easy a trigger. When the smoke cleared, we had to buy a new rear-view mirror. It feels like there are always enough problems." The next morning, Jay and Butch sat at the kitchen table with Tessa and Sarah, sipping coffee and juice. The morning news broadcast played in the background. Jay said, "You should probably take Beanie to the cabin to rest. He needs to gain strength." "Good idea," Butch replied. "Can you help me load it onto the truck?" "Of course," Jay nodded, and then, after a short pause, asked, "What's between you and Becky?" "We need to talk, but I can only see one outcome," Butch said, adding, "Becky is in serious trouble. She needs help." Sarah and Tessa looked sad, but didn't say anything. Butch continued, "I thought about it a lot. Marriage today has become a fiction. He needs serious changes, and divorce is even worse." "I agree with you," Jay said, "but what would you change?" "First, we need to stop punishing the victim," Butch replied. "Too often, the life of the betrayed spouse goes downhill, and he cannot even express his point of view. No wonder there is so much anger and hatred. This needs to end, and no financial gain for the cheater. They organized this circus themselves, let them pay." A group of thieves carried out a daring painting heist at the Carlisle Museum last night, said the morning news announcer. Police say the suspects are still at large. The man is in serious but stable condition at a local hospital. His injuries are likely related to the robbery, the report continued. "Honest communication should be a must," Butch continued. "If the marriage is not satisfactory, it should be discussed and reconsidered. No hiding. If someone wants to have an affair, let them be honest. The disrespect shown by cheating starts a spiral of destruction, I believe. Deception and manipulation must be punished." "Why then get married at all?" asked Sarah. "According to the latest data, marriage is gradually becoming a thing of the past," Butch replied. "Young people put it off or don't join at all, and that's sad. A huge advantage of marriage is the stability it gives the family. There is hardly any other form of relationship that provides such a deep connection. When loving people walk hand in hand all their lives, it is simply incredible. But the downside is that one of the spouses usually does not outlive the other. That's all I can say about it," Butch finished, looking around. All four had tears in their eyes. Butch and Becky tried to have a civil conversation. "You're not thinking straight, Becky. Don't you see how your actions are harming yourself? I'm ready to go with you to a therapist." Let's listen to what they have to say. Are you really ready to go? She asked hopefully. Yes, I'm ready, Butch replied. Becky was silent for a moment and then asked thoughtfully, Do we have any chance, Butch? Butch looked at her and replied, I'd rather burn warts off a monkey's ass. Becky felt anger wash over her. I can divorce you and deprive you of the opportunity to see our daughter, she threatened. Try, Butch said, his voice calm. I will be happy to provide the judge with a video recording of your performance with your new friend. I think the judge will be impressed by your virtuoso playing of other people's instruments in a public place. That says a lot about you as a mother. Sarah is already with me. She's fine, but I would still leave you, no matter how hard you tried. I won't forget what you did. We both deserve better than to be prisoners of the past. You better go your own way. The Thompson brothers were at their hut with Petra, Tessa, and Sarah. They were enjoying a sunny day in nature. What a beautiful day, Tessa exclaimed. Yes, it's a beautiful day, and hopefully it'll be an equally beautiful night, Butch replied, adding, By the way, I have gifts for you. He went to his truck, took out a bag, and took out 3 identical ceramic figurines of forest fairies. He handed each of the girls a figurine, which made them delighted. These fairies are not for public display, you understand, he said suggestively. Thank you, they are just great, the girls said in one voice. Glad you liked them, Butch replied with a sly smile. Oh yes, I almost forgot. I got a job at the zoo. I'll be an assistant there. The tea looks like it's ready, Petra said, smiling. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.